As the final bell rang in the school, we couldn't wait to get home to play with our pogo sticks or attempt yet another high score in Pac-Man. These were the 70s, a time of booming toy industry. Many of the toys from those days have survived to this day and are still very popular. Others inspired the development of popular modern-day toys, like the PlayStation. We all remember going to the arcades to flush out a frustrating day at school. Those places were always jam-packed with boys and girls, and it was really difficult to find an open spot. After 1975, however, you didn't need to go to the arcades anymore. Atari released the first ever video game called Pong, and the days of queuing outside the arcades were over. Released as a single game that could be played over and over, it was awesome initially, but you'd probably get bored after your 1000th game. The problem was solved within 2 years with the release of Atari 2600. It had the option of changing cartridges, and you could play multiple games through the same system. Boys and girls spent their weekends in front of their screens trying to beat each other's scores in Pac-Man and Space Invaders. Even the parents got sucked into the Atari mania and gave their kids a tough competition. Though the Atari 2600 was awesome and everyone wanted it, not everyone could afford it. Back in those days, one unit was sold for $199, which is around $800 in today's market. Atari sure was expensive, but fun doesn't necessarily need to cost this much. Sometimes all it takes for a fun little evening is a ball made out of foam. Who remembers their mom yelling at them for breaking something inside the house? Probably everyone. Often, it was due to tossing a ball around. If there was a ball in the house, it left a trail of destruction along its way, until Parker Brothers were hit with this amazing idea of making a foam ball. Nerf ball was invented in 1969, and it transformed the way we had fun. A big restriction on fun had been lifted. We didn't need to think about controlling our force or surroundings when throwing the ball. The whole house became our playground. It was such a big success that 4 million of them were sold in the first year of its release. Parker Brothers didn't stop with a small foam ball. Later on, a basketball game called Nerf Hoop and a Nerf football were introduced. Even today, Nerf foam dart guns are popular with the kids. The concept of a Nerf ball was so much fun to play with, but as we get a bit older, we want something intricate with a touch of sophistication. $6 Million Man's action figure provided just that, and that's why it was so popular with teens. Every kid who grew up in the 70s remembers the super hit show $6 Million Man. That show featured Colonel Steve Austin, a former astronaut who gained superhuman abilities after being implanted with a bionic eye, removable limbs, and other gadgets. Kids fantasized about those abilities and idealized the Colonel. That's why when Kenner decided to produce Colonel Austin's action figures, they were sold like crazy. People marked their calendars and raced to the markets to get their hands on the action figure first. It's one thing to make an impressionable action figure that has the same features as the character they were representing, but it's a whole other game to reproduce the exact abilities of the character. Kenner made it so realistic that it seemed like you had a real living, breathing Steve Austin in your house. Like the real $6 Million Man, the action figure had a bionic eye that you could look into through an eyepiece on the back of its head. Similarly, there was a button in the back that, when you pushed, would lift his bionic arm that could lift 2 pounds. Despite the bionic enhancements of Colonel Austin, it was prone to breaking like any other toy. There was one particular doll of the 70s, however, that didn't have any fancy bionic implants, but was so resilient that even the toughest of kids had to overexert themselves to put a crack in that tough guy. As kids, we always had an urge to disassemble or break things apart. It may have been so much fun to play with a toy, yet we didn't think twice before making a wreckage out of it. Our parents understood our tendencies and tried to bring in the toughest toys that could resist the onslaught. The guys at Kenner accepted the challenge and produced a practically unbreakable doll. Geniuses at Kenner Toy Company came up with Stretch Armstrong in 1976. Unlike Colonel Steve Austin, this doll was made without taking aesthetics into account. It wasn't the most handsome-looking doll around, but no one could beat it when it came to toughness. It was a short, muscular man with big eyes that challenged you to try to break him apart. That sort of brought out the brute within you, and it was surprising to see how inclined to violence you could be. But the poor Armstrong bore everything without a single crack. You could stretch it to an incredible 5 feet, and it would slowly come back to its original shape. It defied common sense. Stretch Armstrong sure was tough, but there's only so much that you can do with a single muscle man. However, when you put two strong men into the mix and put a ring around them, then things start to get a little interesting. A fist from the side, a block from the right, and a knockout punch to finish things off. Victory! Oh, want a rematch? You got it! Rock'em Sock'em Robots made it possible to enjoy some robot versus robot action even before robots became popular. It was a high-stakes game with two robots standing in the middle of the ring. There were two joysticks each on the sides to control the robots. The goal was to knock the head off of the other's robot. Not literally, though. With a punch from the right angle, the head of the robot got loose, and that meant the game was over. It could then be fixed easily by a little press of the hand. The great thing about this toy was its simplicity. There was no need for batteries or cells, and no complex setup either. Yet it was one of the most popular toys of the 70s. Rock'em Sock'em Robots were a great source of fun and entertainment for the boys. Girls were not that interested in the whole robot WrestleMania, but that didn't mean that they didn't have their fair share of fun. I still remember when my sister received a dollhouse as a birthday present. It came with a whole set of furniture like chairs, tables, sofas, accessories to decorate the interior, kitchens, appliances, rugs, curtains, and even miniature food items. It had everything present in a house in those days. She was so excited to set up her dollhouse that she spent the whole day in front of it. Though I'm not proud of it, whenever we fought, I would always threaten her with the safety of her dollhouse. That seemed to do the trick every time. A dollhouse was the most popular birthday gift for a girl in the 70s, but boys don't like to sit for hours in front of a house. They want something that would keep their blood running, like a pogo stick. Who remembers those bouncing races on a pogo stick? The first jump was crucial, and the one who got that down perfectly usually led the race. The real challenge was not to collide with others and fall flat on your face. The skinnier guys always had an unfair advantage, and the one who fell first had to buy drinks for everyone. It was crazy how popular pogo sticks were in the 70s. Come evening, the streets got crowded with boys and girls of all ages jumping up and down on a stick. The inspiration for these jumping sticks came from a poor girl named Pogo, whose father made a jumping stick for her to hop her way to the church every day since she couldn't afford to have shoes. Born out of necessity, the pogo sticks became a fun toy for kids of the 70s. It was fun jumping around on the pogo sticks, but sometimes I wished I could levitate in the air, like Luke Skywalker. I knew it wasn't possible though, so I just imagined myself doing so while sitting in front of my Luke Skywalker action figure. I can't forget the excitement of that day, the day I bought the collection of Star Wars action figures. I had to try hard to convince my parents that those weren't like other toys that they bought for me a week ago, and that they were special to me. I displayed my prized collection on the front shelf of my room, and boasted in front of my visiting friends and relatives. I also made my friends buy the action figures. We'd then recreate scenes from the movies and pretend like we were in a galaxy far, far away. Those were some of the best days of my life. Star Wars action figures were just as popular as the movies themselves. When the first batch was produced a year after the release of the movie in 1977, it was sold out in a flash. This led to serial production of the toys, but the supply never really caught up to the demand. Kenner Brothers introduced additional characters, vehicles, playsets, and accessories over the years following the success of the first batch. These items are now highly sought after by collectors and would fetch you some good money. But who'd trade money for their beautiful memories of childhood? Speaking of memories, there is one particular game of the 70s that tested our memory and vocabulary. When friends and family got together in the 70s, someone almost always brought the box of Boggle in the middle and turned the friendly atmosphere into a hostile, competitive room. Everyone wanted to flex their vocabulary. There was always that one cheater in the group who took glances at others' words at any chance he got. But without him, the game may not have been that much fun. Boggle was more of a brainy game that made you question your vocabulary. There was a box with 16 dice. Each dice had letters imprinted on them. At the start of the game, someone would close the lid of the box, then shake it to randomize the letters on the front. Then we would have to make words from the letters by making horizontal, vertical, or diagonal sequences. The words had to be at least 3 letters long, and the points varied directly with the number of letters of the words. Confused? That's how we felt at the time too. But that was what made it so much fun. Boggle was all about memory and vocabulary, testing out your pattern recognition skills. Wait, wasn't there another game that tested similar pattern recognition skills? Who remembers the frustration of hearing the fail sound while playing Simon? It was even more annoying when we were instead expecting to see all the lights flashing. Despite the frustration, we just couldn't stop playing. The game was so simple, and yet we spent hours trying to beat our previous score. It was especially fun to compete with friends and mock their reaction times. Simon was another popular game of the 70s that kept us engaged for hours. The rules were simple. Remember the increasingly complex pattern of flashing lights, and you get the boasting rights of being the sharpest in the bunch. However, you also had to be prepared for jestful remarks from your friends if you weren't so good with patterns. In the end, it was all about the fun of trying to beat each other's scores while laughing off your mistakes. And that's how we used to have fun in the 70s.